Hello and welcome to the Brew Hoop Podcast. We are going to be talking all about Summer League today, the ups, the downs, the triumphs, the sadness of Fletcher McGee and all of us who thought that he might be okay. Turns out he just didn't really play at all or shoot or anything. So I'm of course Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, joined as per usual by Riley Feldman and Kyle Carr. Fellas, how's it going on this wonderful post Summer League edition of the pod?
Well, I think we all come in with a little bit of resignation in our voices because basketball is like officially over for 2.5 months and then the season starts again. And unfortunately, as is Bucks Summer League tradition, the Bucks did pretty much as awful as you could expect throughout their selection of 5 games, which we'll get into. But no, I think it's kind of sad not having even fake basketball to watch anymore. But we'll break it down, and then everybody will get a nice deserved summer break, and then we'll come back to it later. But
yeah, it was summer league basketball at its finest. And how you define finest is totally up to you. But it was weird because I think because the Bucks in the past I've had someone that was worth caring about, and now this year was like, well, it's not really like a player that's for sure going to be on the roster that I'm going to invest to see how they look for the first time. Like normally it's a draft pick, but because the Bucks didn't have one, it was kind of like I don't know who these dudes are. I guess I'll try and care, but in the end, it's summer league basketball, and it's going to be for either a two-way spot or maybe even a training camp invite. So does it really matter in the end? To some people, yes.
But maybe not to us. Maybe not to this group right here. I don't know.
No, I guess not. Yeah, kudos to the people that did care. I always get kind of excited for Summer League basketball to be back. I'm like, oh yeah, Bucks basketball. I can finally watch it. And I get 2 minutes into the first game, and I'm like, oh, nope, don't need to watch a whole lot of this.
I remember a lot of this from last year. It looks very similar to years past of just chaos, and every once in a while, Jock Londale putting up 55 points or something crazy like that. But outside of that, there's not much to get excited about, unfortunately.
Yeah, finished obviously with a 2-3 record overall in the Summer League expedition. I think when I look back at that, we still haven't had a winning record since 2012. So shout out to the Bucks Summer League team, especially the Jason Kidd years. Really good. Sean Sweeney 1-4 for all of his years. Handed off to Josh. What was his name?
Longstaff.
Handed off to
Brockhammer.
Yeah, handed off to
Longstaff
is
the
and
snapper.
I thought that's what you said.
No.
Yeah, Longstaff is on the staff now. Yeah.
I got confused. I got turned around. Too many Johns.
Yep, that's right. Me too. So, yeah, Broghammer 1-4 as well. But Kyle, was there anyone who actually, at least in terms of the Summer League proceedings, who piqued your interest at least a little bit?
I would say Dalton Holmes looked pretty decent, I would say. Especially that first one against the Sixers, it just like he caught fire. He has a good shooting stroke. I really like it. Definitely needs another year to like get his body more NBA ready, but I'd say he was the guy out of all the ones that we weren't sure on going in that he kind of stood out to me the most. I didn't watch much of Jock Landale, so he sounded like he was pretty good. Same with Elijah Bryant, but for me, I would say if they can get Holmes on the Wisconsin herd, that would be a win because I think he has a future in the NBA compared to everyone else. So it's just I think his shooting stroke, his ability to just create his own shot and hit those shots is something that, especially for a D2 player, you don't see that often. So I think a year with the herd would be awesome. And I guess he was the only one that really stood out to me out of anyone else.
What about you, Riley? Anyone look show some flashes that you were interested in?
How about DJ Wilson with that 6-point average, huh? That's exactly what we're hoping for in year 3 DJ. And hopefully that's to be expected because he's been pretty much awful in all of Summer League. But of all the guys not named DJ or Sterling, like Kyle was saying, I thought Elijah Bryant was interesting just because I think he had a invites last year, or he did a training with the Bucks or something along those lines. But I think they've kind of kept their eye on him for a little while, and he's kind of interesting as like a lead guard, but can do quite a bit of scoring as evidenced by just his sheer output. But he can, also do a little bit of passing. So it's kind of an interesting like all around guy, and that's kind of why I'd hoped Rajon Tucker would be, just because there were moments where Rajon could flash the athleticism, but it seemed like, I don't know if it was like he doesn't have enough ball skills, or he would switch off on defense, and you would kind of see moments where like he would choose the right shot attempt or kind of choose the right pass, but he's not a flashy passer. So I was kind of disappointed by that as well a little bit. But in general, I would agree with Kyle that maybe Dalton Holmes was the top guy that was most interesting. But even then, he still seems like there's quite a bit of work that could be done. So I doubt there's anybody that, again, that isn't named DJ or Sterling that's really going to break through right away onto the roster. And maybe they'll upgrade Bonzi, but outside of that, pretty much same old from Summer League. And like you said off the start, RIP to everybody's Fletcher McGee dreams. I am very skeptical he will be brought in on a training camp invite, though I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, he was brutal
Yeah.
or didn't play. The Portland game, he had a couple moments where he hit in the first half where he hit some shots off the dribble. But otherwise, if you thought Fletcher McGee was going to be this guy that could be like a store brand discount version of Kyle Korver, I think those dreams were completely thrown out the window.
Yeah, it was too bad too, because he seemed like the most tailor-made fit within Bud's potential offense. I mean, it was like, yeah, this guy just likes to shoot threes. That's pretty much all he does. And then so it was pretty disappointing. I honestly was kind of disappointed to really not see him play at all, or even shoot much in any sort of meaningful way. Probably, I doubt that the training staff or coaching staff is hiding him for any potential reason. I think he probably just does not have a future potentially with the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't know if anyone else really. Go ahead, Riley.
I was going to say it probably should have been a red flag to the entire league when the NCAA record maker for 3-pointers wasn't even drafted. There was probably beyond his 3-point shooting and excuses that he was the only guy on Wofford that could do anything. I'm sure there were probably other reasons that he was not worthy of even a second-round pick.
Excellent point. I thought Matt Farrell was actually decent on the team. I don't know. He showed like a little bit. He had like a very dogged nature defensively, and was really built for a small guy. And had a decent quick trigger and showed some decent passing skills. So he was the only other guy that really stood out to me. Riley, is there any reason for concern given the fact that Sterling Brown kind of played like dog crap?
It's a good way to put it. I don't really think so, because even like last year, so he took like a really dominant role on offense last year and kind of similar-ish this year, but both he and DJ were like not great. And I don't know how much of that is to chalk up like they just got off of their seasons and maybe they don't really give a damn because this is their third year at Summer League. And we've seen, the past 2 seasons, especially last season, that both of them are capable of doing something at an NBA level. So even though they didn't play super duper great, I think it's encouraging that they still ran Sterling out there as many minutes as they did for the 3 games that he did appear. Shooting, definitely, let's work on our shooting a little bit more over the summer, Sterling. But I think it's just probably more confirmation that he's not going to end up being a reliable like lead option in an offensive set. And I'm not sure really how much more to take away from that, because again, they just got off. They're probably looking forward to like, okay, we can finally get our summer started. So if they came in super not focused on dominating to the fullest extent, I would get it, and I'm going to chalk it up to that.
Yeah, Kyle, any lingering concerns based on the play of the actual rostered players by the Bucks?
No, I'm not really concerned, just because we're not going to expect them to be the lead guys on any lineup that the Bucks throw out there. So, and DJ Wilson defensively was still good, I would say. Offensively he was not great at all, but defensively he was good. Sterling, it seemed like he just couldn't get any shots to fall, which, he might just have been in a slump. I'm not too concerned, just because I feel like DJ Wilson's going to be used mainly as like that switching like 4 that you can throw out there and improve your team's defense. Well, Sterling's going to kind of just bully his way in, kind of be that dogged defender, hit a couple corner threes if needed. So I'm not worried about them. Bonzi Colson, I don't know if we're going to count him as one of the NBA players, but he was good throughout all of Summer League. And I guess that was something that was encouraging, just seeing that he, at the very least, should get another 2-way contract. If not, maybe just be on the full roster itself. But Bonzi, I would say, was out of the 3 NBA, quote unquote, NBA players, he was the most impressive.
Yeah, I generally don't read much into it either. I guess I'm going to take the larger sample size of Sterling Brown basically playing better than a lot of the Detroit Pistons in the playoffs over how he performs in the summer league. And it was nice to have that as a litmus test to recognize that when some of the other guys who are going off, I get a little FOMO when like guys on other teams are going off, like Lonnie Walker's going off for the Spurs, and I kind of wanted the Bucks to draft him last year, or Zaire Smith is looking good for the Sixers. He's showing some flashes, and that makes me get a little FOMO because Dante isn't playing, and the Bucks don't have a pick that's playing this year, and they're not going to have for a lot, probably some of these impending years to come. They're probably not going to have picks really in the first round in case they trade them away for some potential reason. So it was probably good to try and acclimate to the fact that the Bucks might not have first round picks playing on their summer league team for the years ahead. So it was kind of good to get used to that and get used to seeing these other people flash and spurts like Walker or Smith, and also still realize that summer league doesn't mean a whole lot in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And I don't know why you were so upset, because the thing with Dante is he's super healthy right now. He's in such good shape right now, and he's already proven himself. So I'm not concerned about that. But kind of besides that, jokes aside on that, I think kind of wrapping around, the only thing that I would be concerned about with the 2 main guys, Sterling and DJ, and then Bonzi to a certain extent as well, is like, we came into this summer league and the Bucks kind of advertised the fact like, okay, they're going back down there again because we want them to be like the lead dominators. And even though this won't be their exact roles on the roster in this upcoming season, they obviously envisioned bigger roles for both of them. And for both Sterling and DJ in different regards, I'm not sure if you got anything out of this summer league that was like, okay, I feel comfortable assuming that he'll be able to step up and fill the gap like Sterling, like fill the gap that was left by Malcolm. Now, obviously, the way that Malcolm plays and the way that Sterling plays, totally different. But I think any sort of, I wouldn't say delusions, but just like ideas or hopes that there's going to be this seamless transition and no real drop off, I think this summer league more than anything kind of knocked that off. And that's important to a certain extent. It should probably help calibrate our expectations for both of those guys and for the roster at large as we kind of head forward. So that would be the only other point I would kind of come out of with the main guys off of summer league.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent transition. We were going to talk a little bit about free agency, especially in the wake of the huge Kawhi news that he's going to be heading over to the LA Clippers along with Paul George. So Paul George stays in the West, but obviously the Bucks' largest foe, the Toronto Raptors from last season, is essentially slayed at this point. They'll still probably be a decent team, but without Kawhi, the idea of them beating the Bucks seems a little outlandish to me, at least at this point. But Riley, you wrote a piece this week just talking about the landscape of the East, who's sort of left in terms of who the Bucks might have to go through on their way, hopefully, potentially to the Eastern Conference Finals or wherever they go in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So, do you want to just like walk us through a little bit of how you kind of felt based on after reporting, writing that piece and just looking at the landscape of the East? Do you want to just walk us through how you sort of felt, at least initially?
Yeah, I think the main summary of the piece in general, the way that I kind of ended up feeling at the end of it is like and I believe, yeah, it had finished up after Kawhi had moved. So with that move, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly that anything less than like a finals appearance, given especially this last season and the way that the league has moved around given free agency, I think the path for the Bucks to a finals appearance is as wide open as they could hope it to be. And that kind of has to do with both like, the moves that were made. Like we'll talk a little bit about Philly, and they're probably the 1B of the East. But besides losing Malcolm, the Bucks retained, which was the goal throughout the majority of the core. They still have Giannis. They still have Chris. And now they're beneficiaries of the fact that one of the contenders from last year has fallen apart with Kawhi, and Boston, who knows about them? They're kind of all over the place, losing both Kyrie and Al Horford. And then once you kind of get off of that, Indiana's interesting insofar as they have a lot of solid guys, but they're not going to have Victor Oladipo until like, I think December or January. So, what's their season going to look like? And then past that, it's an open question. It's kind of the usual as years past, where once you get to 5 through 8 or even beyond that, it's just kind of a mishmash of good-ish teams, but probably nobody that's going to seriously contend or seriously threaten the Bucks. So I would say the main feeling I got out of it was, if the idea is to try and at least win a championship, the way that the Kawhi saga kind of worked out was as perfect as the Bucks could hope for. I know there's a lot of people who would love to get another chance at beating the Raptors in the Eastern Conference Finals, but to me, there's no such thing as asterisk for championships. None of that matters to me. I just want as simple a path as possible to the finals, and I think with the way free agency worked out, both internally and externally, the Bucks have positioned themselves to get to the finals. As good as you could hope. They have as good of a shot as possible.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the sentiment of the no asterisks too. I mean, LeBron, no one cares anymore about the fact that LeBron had basically an easy path for years on years on years. The only team that his Heat basically had to beat was that Indiana Pacers team that aged worse. They're worse than like a cheese that was left out. So, Kyle, how do you feel about the 76ers? It feels like they're probably, obviously, as we're talking here, the prime potential contender for the Milwaukee Bucks. They signed Al Horford, got Tobias Harris back, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. Our guy Zaire Smith started flashing some stuff in summer league, so potentially their depth might be a little bit better next year. But how are you just feeling now in terms of the landscape of the East and the Bucks' potential ability to go through this Sixers roster? I'm having a hard time with it personally because they seem like their team was already so weird, and then they made it weirder.
Yeah, and I said it on the last episode of the podcast. Their defense is going to be fantastic. Their offense is going to be shambolic. And I still feel that way. It's one thing to add Al Horford, but they don't have any shooting. Like, you lose Jimmy Butler, which, that's it was both a good and bad thing for Philly, just because Jimmy is someone that can get his own shot. And, he's one of their best scorers. But he was also a ticking time bomb waiting to happen in terms of the locker room. And there's no way he was going to want to take a lower role. But now, I look at the starting lineup, and Josh Richardson can shoot, but he's not better than JJ Redick. Tobias Harris is okay, but for how much you're paying, and people want to complain about Middleton, and I'd say Tobias Harris is an inferior player to him. And I don't know if he's really going to be a guy that is going to justify that salary and be that good of be that key player in a contending team. We know Ben Simmons doesn't want to shoot, and when it gets to the playoffs, it's going to get to the point where you're going to play 4 and 5 because Simmons is going to be on the court and he's just going to pass it to someone. And Horford and Embiid, yeah, they're good pick and pop guys, but they're good enough that you have to guard them. But at the same time, you could let them take 10, 11 threes and you're going to be okay with that. So I just don't know what Philly has offensively that's going to trouble Milwaukee. And I know people are like, well, now they can slow down Giannis. It's like neither Embiid or Horford can slow him down. So I don't know where this idea is coming from. So I don't know if it's going to, the Sixers are not going to walk to the finals like some bench scrub named James Ennis had said. And I wouldn't even say the Sixers are 1B. They're number 2, and they're solely number 2. For the rest of the East, it's interesting just because I still think Toronto's going to be good enough to make the playoffs and maybe even get home court advantage. I don't know if they're going to, I don't want to consider them contender, but they're good enough to get home court. Boston replacing Kyrie with Kemba was a good thing, but losing Al Horford will hurt. Indiana has nice pieces, but kind of like what Riley said with Oladipo being out until December, January, who knows where they'll be. Miami's fine. They'll probably make the playoffs. Detroit might make the playoffs. Brooklyn's going to for sure be a playoff team. It's kind of like a lot of, other than the Bucks and the Sixers, there's no one else I could see win the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and I would just kind of go for it, Adam. You go.
No, go ahead, Riley.
Okay, well, I was just gonna kind of wrap back around quick on Philly. So I tend to agree that there are a lot of questions just because they have a oddly constructed roster, and I think the main difference for me until we see how that team actually plays is they're relying on Joel Embiid, who, when healthy, is a really, really good player, but he shows up every single season, 600 pounds overweight. He has a back that is held together by twine, and there's this weird, like, he's obviously a dominant offensive player, but like he's not an initiator whatsoever. So they still have to figure that out. It's a weird fit between him and Al Horford. Like you said, Ben Simmons, he doesn't shoot from outside. I think it'll help that he's going to have the ball a lot more on offense. But, Joel Embiid isn't exactly like a run it up and down the court kind of guy, and neither is Horford, I don't think. So that's kind of a weird one as well. And once you get past the top 5, it's a lot of Mike Scott minutes, like just a lot of Mike Scott minutes. And how is that going to hold up over the course of a season? So I think if you're looking at Philly and the Bucks, both of them, I think of all the Eastern teams, and we can talk, I think Boston probably gets a little bit of shortchange just because they also made a lot of moves, but we'll talk about them. But I think if you look at those two, just top line talent, maybe there's similarities, but the edge that the Bucks have is they have a whole season already under their belts, essentially perfecting the system and keeping the majority of the guys who perfected that system on roster. And you have Robin Lopez and Wes Matthews, which we can kind of work in. But I think there's a lot more reliability for the Bucks, especially now that they've had a postseason together with kind of the way they want to play. That once it comes to the tight moments, I think that's going to end up proving out. And again, all it takes is one injury to Joel Embiid in their season quickly, hits the brink. Like that's a really tough spot for them to be in. So I think they should get respect, but I think it is an open question to see how exactly it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to see. I think you actually make a good point with Boston getting short shrift. I feel like last year Kyrie just was an awful, crazy influence on that team and like torpedoed just about everyone's season, including probably the young guys. So I'm actually curious to see if like Tatum and Brown will play better in a much probably healthier locker room culture there. So, and they definitely have the assets to make a move too. They make, I think I tweeted this out, but like one of the reasons I kind of like I was fine with the Malcolm Brogdon move is I think it was important for Horst to get a few more assets in his war chest in case some sort of move came along. I mean, looking back on it, that say what you want about Eric Bledsoe, but the fact we basically got him for a first-round pick and dumping Greg Monroe's salary is kind of crazy. And you just you don't know when that stuff is going to happen again, and you want to be able to, when you're a contender like that, you want to be able to at least have some chips to play in that regard. And so I think I think it was a smart move in that way. And obviously Boston has more assets than the Bucks, so they'd be able to outbid the Bucks were that scenario to come up. But I'm really interested to see what happens with them. And so they're really the only other person that I even consider potentially in Milwaukee's stratosphere at the top of the East. And I'd also think Milwaukee's probably getting short shrift, at least in terms of national conversation, just because everything stayed the same. And so I think people are sleeping on that, even though they seem to be like they have like the second best odds, I think, to win the title. So it just seems like not that many people are talking about them, at least at this point, just because there's not a whole lot of change or not a whole lot of new things to talk about. But at least locally, there are some new different things to the roster that, like you were saying, Riley, we should probably get into. Wes Matthews, Robin Lopez joined the fray. And then obviously the big news this past week was Thanasis Antetokounmpo signing with the Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah, I want to get into that. Actually. I think, yeah, let's like this is all right. Let's tell me about your feelings about Thanasis Antetokounmpo signing with the Bucks, Kyle.
It's whatever. It's just a 15th roster spot. I don't care. Like, if Giannis went to the GM, if Giannis went to John Horst and ownership and said, "Sign my brother," are you going to say no? No, of course not. So I don't care. Like, he's not going to play. He's mainly there probably to keep Giannis grounded, probably, like as a nice security blanket. I don't know. Like, it doesn't. I think we're making way too much of a big deal out of it. Yeah, I get the nepotism and blah, blah, blah. We just signed Brook Lopez's brother as well. So maybe there's nepotism running around the organization. Who cares? I don't. It's a 15th roster spot guy. Like, maybe Thanasis can be used as a throw in case of emergency defender if you're short on wings, because there's not really a lot of threes. There's, we have a lot of guys that can play the two, but no one that can really play the three besides Chris Sterling and maybe Wes Matthews. So it doesn't hurt to have another wing out there, and it's the 15th roster spot. Who cares?
Well, I feel like there are certainly some concerns from people, especially like the idea that Yeah, it is. It is like, 15th roster spot. Who cares? But the idea of like, what if you have to end up having to trade that 15th roster spot? It's weird that like that's like the guy who you would normally be able to do whatever with. But if you do something with him, are you worried that you're gonna piss off your franchise cornerstone? Is the other guys in the locker room gonna start to feel like, well, the franchise is just pandering to Giannis in every sort of way? Is he just like running the ship now? Is that going to mess with the sort of locker room culture and what's going on in there? Do you share any of those concerns, Riley?
Yeah, I for me, I understand where Kyle and kind of the viewpoint that Kyle's representing now is coming from. Like, it's not that big of a deal. I get it to a certain extent, but I'm just categorically opposed to it. Like, philosophically speaking, I think it's just not wonderful. Like you said, Adam, there's the worries about like, what if it's a rare situation where you need it, but if the Bucks plan on like winning right now, which ideally is the idea, then you're probably going to need every possibility, like every bit of flexibility. And to me, it's just like I'm opposed to it because one, the nepotism, which I think is silly. Like, how small league is that? And I get it, like 15th roster spot, but we already have a little bit of nepotism in the different reaches of the organization with the ownership, which is whatever. They're the owners. It is what it is. But like, to pander exclusively like that is, to me, I don't agree with it. Just the idea behind it. If you need to sign Giannis's brother to $3 million guaranteed in order to get Giannis to stay with the team, like you've probably gone wrong elsewhere. That everything else hasn't been ideal, so that you have to have this extra like blackmail essentially to get him over the line. And it's like, Robin Lopez, same kind of situation where you can kind of. I'm okay with Robin Lopez because you can squint and kind of see the basketball reason, but anybody out here trying to rationalize that we're going to use Thanasis Antetokounmpo as a like D-up guy in the playoffs in a critical situation when he couldn't break through with the freaking Knicks years ago, like the tire fired, I think he played 6 NBA minutes with the Knicks, like, and I don't know, I didn't follow his Greek career, but I'm pretty sure he only averaged like 5 points a game. And I don't even know how many minutes when he played over in Greece. So it's like, we cannot look at this in any sort of way unless we're trying to delude ourselves as anything worthwhile on the court. Like, I'm going in that he is not going to play at all. And if he does, it's definitely like trying to, again, curry favor with Giannis, which I guess you do what you got to do. But to me, I don't like it. I still haven't really reconciled myself with it. And I should say, if the Bucks bring Monte Ellis in, I better not hear a single person complain about wasting a roster spot on Monte Ellis. Otherwise, I will lose my mind.
Exactly.
I think the Robin
Monte Ellis thing, whatever. Again, end of the bench guy.
See, but it's okay. So, but here's the thing, right? So we're saying that now, but I think the same people were saying, oh, it's whatever, end of the bench. Had it been like a year ago with like Christian Wood or anybody else that's been on the end of the bench, there's been like this line of thinking for such a long time, which I don't necessarily disagree with, that like you have to maximize every possibility to improve the team. Even if it's like a flyer on some guy like, Dalton Holmes, you take a flyer on him, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you just a 3% chance that this guy who has no NBA experience, he's still a relatively unproven commodity, he might break through. That's not going to be the case with Thanasis. And now all of a sudden everybody's like, it's whatever, no big deal. Like, those same people just a year ago were like, well, we need to keep Christian Wood because who knows if it breaks through. So I think I'm probably more annoyed with that kind of philosophical change by everybody, that we're going to look the other way just because it's Giannis. And I get that we have to look the other way because it's Giannis, because he's Giannis. I get it. But it's the hypocrisy behind it all. It's a little bit too much for me to bear. I'll grit my teeth and bear it just because that's what we got to do. But I've just been kind of annoyed with the rhetoric around the whole thing from a lot of different people is kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and that makes sense with like Christian Wood, because I think the issue was Christian Wood had such a dominant summer league, and it got to the point where Ersan had his contract, and we can all agree that it's not a great contract. So it's like, why bother with that? He went through a stretch where he wasn't playing well, and then DJ Wilson wasn't playing at all. So I was like, well, why not just give this guy a chance? While I think this year it's a little bit different, where we're not. You would hope that the players ahead of Thanasis and eventually maybe Monte Ellis or whoever else the Bucks put in that role, you kind of hope that you don't have to make sure. Yeah, well, we can get to that later. We kind of have to hope that they're not expected to be contributing, or there's this hope. And I get that you want to you maximize every roster spot as much as you can, but the biggest thing though is to make sure that your guys from 1 through 8 are good enough to compete for a championship. And if guys 1 through 8 are good enough to compete for a championship, then that's when you get to 14 to 15, and it's not as dire. Or because the Bucks don't have much cap space, they don't have much assets, they don't have much cap space, so these contracts probably aren't going to be able to be used unless you're trading an Eric Bledsoe or unless you're trading with some of these other higher contracts for the guys that are in spots 1 through 8. So I guess for me, it's just more of I'm not worried about 13, 14, 15. I'm worried about 1 through 8, 1 through 9, and I think the Bucks 1 through 9 is now good enough to win a championship. And not making the finals would be a disappointment. And if they don't make the finals, it's not going to be because spot 14 or 15 didn't play, or they were just given a contract for nepotism, or Monte Ellis have it all. It's going to be because Eric Bledsoe had another crappy playoff series, or injuries hit the team, or I'm trying to think of another, maybe no one actually does fill in that void that Malcolm Brogdon left. So relying on guys on a vet minimum or 14 to 15 roster spot, I don't think that's a good way of thinking in terms of wanting to win a championship.
See, but okay, so Adam, I'll give you a chance to rebuttal, but I just want to jump in one more time. So I get all that, and again, I think that's a reasonable take, Kyle, and I should keep that in mind. But if that's going to be the case, right? So then the other rationale is okay, they did this to keep Giannis happy, right? You know what would keep Giannis happy? Having the best top 8 players possible. And I don't think letting Malcolm Brogdon go would have allowed that, or that's not achieving the best top 8. So if we're going to be happy about this, then I understand, if we're doing everything, quote unquote, to keep Giannis happy and get to that next contract, I think being able to compete right now at the highest level would get that, and keeping Malcolm Brogdon would definitely do that, in my opinion. So I
agree with that.
It just seems strange, and it's okay, so we're not going to spend the money here, but you know what? We don't have any problem spending this $3 million and granting a roster spot to Thanasis just because he's related to Giannis. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, and I'm not a fan of it personally.
That's fair.
Adam, any thoughts?
I don't know. It feels like a hedge on their part. This whole thing has been really, really difficult for me to parse out. I mean, on one end, I'm like, okay, this guy kind of seems like a crappy Stanley Johnson or whatever, if you are put in awful contexts that are way off your prescription. And we do need you do need a 3 or whatever that you can put on the roster. I tend to agree with Riley that there is no sort of realistic basketball argument that you could ever sell me in a million years, no matter how drunk you get me, to convince me that Thanasis Antetokounmpo makes a whole lot of sense being in the NBA, considering no one was really even sniffing around him. And but then at the same time, I'm also I don't know freaking anything about how he plays at all. I mean, I haven't watched him in years. Obviously he couldn't break through with the Knicks, but sometimes the Celtics just take these flyers on guys. I mean, we just saw Daniel Dice play minutes in the playoffs for them, and yeah, granted he got eaten alive, but they've been doing this for a couple of years. They just pick a random guy out of Europe, and I have no idea. I haven't looked at any of their stats. I have no idea if it's significantly better than Thanasis Antetokounmpo. But so I don't even really want to get into the basketball side of it, because I don't know anything about how he plays. And I think anyone who talks about how he's played, or how he's improved, or anything about how he's played recently, probably doesn't know either, unless they've been watching Greek basketball, which kudos to you if you're someone who did that. But I and then at the same time, I don't think Robin Lopez, besides being a potential put into the nepotism thing, I don't think he belongs in this conversation at all, because I actually think no matter what, I think he's a really good asset at $5 million, because he could start on a lot of teams. And so at the very worst, you could always trade him partway through the year, and Brook Lopez could easily get injured. And I think you need another big body in there. And Lopez, Robin, even if he doesn't shoot threes, I would say on the defensive end, he can probably be a reasonable facsimile of Brook, which is a huge element of why this team was so successful last year. So I don't know how many guys you can actually find who will be able to do that and have the same sort of rebounding effect as his brother. So anyway, the thing I am not sure about though, Riley, is after this whole Kawhi thing, and I know Giannis like just had this article in ESPN talking about how he's like he wants to be in Milwaukee, you know, he wants to be part of a winner or whatever. Like he's like, here, I'll just read this quote here. Okay, it's on this ESPN article. It's from Giannis. I'm going into year 7. It's insane. My goal is going to stay the same. It's get better, take it day by day, step by step, and the ultimate goal is to win a championship. As long as that we are all on the same page and we are all focused on that goal. Why not play for the Bucks 20 years? Why not play 25 years? Why not, after playing, be a member of the coaching staff or a member of the front office? But we have got to have the same goal. We have got to have the same principles, the same. We got to focus on winning a championship. I want to be part of a winning team. As long as we have the same mindset and same approach to the game, there's no reason for me to move and not be like Steph Curry, not be like Dirk Nowitzki or Kobe Bryant or Tim Duncan. So that all sounds good. It sounds like all the kind of stuff that he's been saying for years now. And maybe it's true. This is he's different than some of these other superstars because of the way that he grew up. Maybe he wants to follow the Dirk model. I'm really curious how some of these Euro superstars might be in the years ahead if they do that, or if they kind of follow the typical superstar model now of forcing your way out. But all Giannis has talked about is how important his family is to him. And so maybe the Bucks think that this is the way to do it. But I honestly have no idea if this is like would help them keep Giannis. I have no idea if winning a championship would mean that Giannis would stay. I just like I don't know if we have any idea what it is that's going to ultimately convince people, any superstar, just like Giannis, that they're going to stay in the same city. I have no idea what the answer is. So maybe the Bucks feel like, hey, if let's win a championship, we also have Thanasis. Let's just like throw 4 different pieces of spaghetti at the wall and hope that something sticks.
Yeah, I get it. And I think talking about like if they're trying to balance where like the main hope, as Giannis just articulated and the team does as well, is to win a championship, like we can agonize about Malcolm Brogdon. And I think the idea, like if you wanted the best top 8 possible, bringing him back is the way to do that. But like we just discussed a few minutes ago, the path to the finals is as open as you can get, even without Malcolm. Like, you know, if your main competitors may be Boston and probably Philly to get to a championship position where anything could happen potentially, I think that bet will probably pay off for them. And I also understand from the aspect of you have to keep in mind, like, if you want to continue to make Giannis happy and continue to have the ability to be a contender, then, you know, trying to avoid getting into the repeater tax any earlier than you have to. I get that as well. So I think once I kind of cool down a little bit, I understand all the different moves they're making. And I think you're right, Adam, that they're probably just betting, like, hedge as many bets as they possibly can, because if Giannis leaves, obviously the team is screwed. Like, there's no getting around that. So I understand where it's all coming from. It's just, like I said earlier, for me, philosophically, I just don't agree with it. And I'm not going to drop that. But if you go at it from an objective sense, you get what they're trying to do. And I think they did as best as they could to kind of serve those two masters of keeping Giannis happy both on the court and off the court. So I understand where they're coming from that regard.
Plus, I mean, yeah, it's not great to lose Malcolm Brogdon, but I guess at the same time, if Brogdon suffers another injury and misses, 20 games next season, then I guess that kind of justifies why not bringing him back was the right decision. It's kind of tough to tell because when Brogdon is healthy, he is a really good player, but he hasn't shown to be healthy in the past 2-3 years. And I guess it could also, you can turn around and be like, well, you just paid 20 something million for a guy that can't stay healthy. And then you get into that issue. And then you're kind of decided, well, now you're in the tax for a guy that's not healthy, but you have to get out of that tax area, or you got to pay this repeater tax because a player isn't healthy. Then it was a lose-lose for the Bucks management in terms of what to do with Brogdon, because he's such a good player that you wanted to bring him back, but not bringing him back can be justified with one injury, and they were able to get draft prospects. And I mean, hell, if the Bucks win a championship next year or even 2 years and Giannis still decides to leave, then I guess then what? I mean, they accomplished a goal in getting the championship, but you still lost, the best player that's going to be part of the franchise. So I don't think, and anything can change within a year. Obviously, we just saw the league went from, well, Golden State's going to win another title to anyone can win this title now. And all it takes is one injury, one trade, one mismanaged organization, and you have a shot. Unless you're the Chicago Bulls, then you don't have a shot.
Then you don't have a shot. Amen. That should be our podcast motto. If you're the Bulls, you don't have a shot.
I think it's interesting though, because it's felt like, I think the local, no, I mean, okay, now I'm getting into something where I'm just like, see things within my own spheres, but it's felt like more of the rhetoric, at least locally, has bended a little bit more towards your side, Riley. But I haven't really seen like almost any. It seems like national people are all kind of either like dismissing it or being like, well, this makes sense. This is like smart. This is, yeah. Why wouldn't you get his brother in? Like, this is like makes a lot of sense. So I think it's kind of interesting to look at those two sides from it. Because I mean, they're not always plugged in, and their national people aren't always like as like considering maybe some of those like locker room implications or whatever. But I think it is still interesting to see their point differ so vastly, I think, from a lot of the people who at least I follow on Twitter.
And I don't love that it was a guarantee. Like the fact that it's guaranteed, I think it's really what makes it. I think that's really the core issue that most people have, is that it was guaranteed for 2 years.
And I think if we're accounting for like what the difference between nationally and locally, it has to do simply with the fact that, like, you know, I love Giannis to death, and obviously he's the best thing that's happened to the franchise in decades. But at the end of the day, I'm a Milwaukee Bucks fan, you know, and it's like, having Giannis maximizes my enjoyment of the Bucks. But if Giannis left, then, you know, I'm not going to follow him to whatever team he goes to next. Like, that's just not what I'm going to do. And if that's going to be the case, then I get leery about, like, we're going to sell the entire franchise, the franchise that I value, like the team itself, to Giannis, essentially. And like, there's a lot of weird dynamics. So I think I would explain the difference there, just being like, you know, for the national guys, like, yes, of course, everything, you know, you sell the franchise down the drain to keep this guy. And I understand that perspective, and I share it to a certain extent. But I also, you know, again, I'm not like a shareholder. Like, whether or not the Bucks win or lose really doesn't affect my life at all. But, you know, I kind of still am stuck in this perspective of like thinking about what's quote unquote best for the team, or like thinking about the team as a larger entity than just this one player. Because even though in basketball and in the NBA, that one player is the difference between competing and otherwise, it's kind of tough to get out of that general fan of the team mindset. I think is probably what the difference is there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Was this therapeutic for you guys? Was this good?
Yeah, I think so. I think, we could probably just a big sigh there. I didn't know I had this all built up in me. It's just I got so annoyed seeing so many people, like, you know, dismissing out of hand any sort of concerns about, you know, bringing Thanasis in. So I guess it was good to get that off my chest. So thank you guys for letting me do that.
Yeah, I guess I've just gotten to the point where the less I'm on Twitter, the better. And I think that's why I've kind of just more dismissed it. I was like, I'm not gonna get into an argument with people over 15th roster spot on Twitter. I don't have time for this.
No, hold on. Okay. If you want to get me started talking about the TBE, though, you better watch out. God.
Now, that's a whole different story.
That's a whole other podcast right there, is what that is.
That is an understandable fight to have.
Chris Haynes just tweeted that free agent big man Costa Koufos has received preliminary interest from Detroit, Sacramento, Toronto, and drumroll please, Milwaukee.
Chicago Bulls. Oh, okay, Milwaukee. Okay.
Sorry.
Does he play for the Greek national team technically? I think he does, right?
I don't know, because I remember we had an episode where we talked about the Greek national team, and he wasn't part of it, but Nick Kalithis was, and I said he was the most dangerous player.
We had an episode where we talked about the Greek national team.
Absolutely.
I think it was, the lightest discussions you can have.
Because we were talking about Dante playing for the Italian team. Which
yes, we're gonna have more Greek national team content too with the FIBA World Cup this summer. But Kostas Koufos,
I'm pretty excited for the FIBA World Cup.
Yeah, that should be cool. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that apparently Giannis and the Greek Federation patch things up, because it seems like every summer they have something to squabble over. So I'm curious to see if that happens again or not. But there should be a lot of good teams. I too am excited for it.
That'll actually be worth watching. Unlike Summer League.
Yeah, that'll actually be stakes and somewhat professional players going on. But I don't know about Kufos. Did he get bought out by the Kings and just sat around? Is that what he's been doing since last season?
I
Uh,
think
It feels
so.
right to me. And I think Giannis
Yeah.
almost ended him, right? Last season was that
Oh,
that
yes.
he ended. Yeah. So maybe they feel bad for
Yeah.
that. I get it. But I think
I
much
think,
like oh, sorry.
yeah, no, I was just saying, yeah, he definitely ended him. He like dunked the last lingering hairs that he had on his head off right off.
I think it's this is kind of like the Robin Lopez thing, but to like a much smaller extent where like he clearly is something of an NBA player. How much he has left, I have no idea. But if for whatever reason they were able to get him on a minimum, then I wouldn't be super duper upset. He's again just even further depth, but I don't know if you need to have like 3 true centers. That seems a little strange to me given the way the team plays, but whatever.
I was gonna say, like, probably don't need that third center when Ursan and DJ and Giannis can all play spot minutes at the 5. But if Kufis is gonna take the Pau Gasol role and just say a lot of nice things about Milwaukee, then okay, sure, I guess.
All right. Last thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
The TPE.
Go ahead, Riley.
Nope. I was gonna say lead it up to the TP. Let's go.
I do kind of want to talk about Milka Brogdon. Maybe this is just I mean, it's definitely because this was how it went, and this is how what he has to do because he's part of the Pacers now, and he's talking about how he's excited to play point guard more or whatever. But it did kind of feel like there was some lingering stuff, like he didn't necessarily want to be here. Did either of you guys get that vibe?
When Kyle and I talked 2 weeks ago when like all the news is going down in free agency, I had said then, and I'm still kind of there, like, I didn't get that vibe at all. Like that people were referencing his exit interviews, like, oh yeah, we'll see what happens. But like, you know, it makes total sense that he's going to be as wide open to whoever's going to pay him as much money as possible. So I didn't get the vibe. And then other people were looking at like, oh, well, he referenced like, oh, I'm ready to play next to a selfless leader. And I really love the way that Coach McMillan, like what his system is like. Of course, he's going to say really nice things about his superstar and the coach that he's presumably going to be playing with for 4 years. Like, I didn't look at it at all like he hated it in Milwaukee or hated it with the organization or hated playing next to Giannis. I didn't take it like that whatsoever. But maybe Kyle, you differ on that.
No, it was in the same boat. Like, you're not going to come into your first interview with your new team and be like, yeah, I mainly was here for the money. Like, you're not going to say that. I mean, you're not going to do what Jabari Parker did and say they don't play me to play defense. Like, you're not going to say something stupid. And Malcolm Brogdon is a very smart person, so he knew damn well, like, I'm just going to say the things I need to say. And then I read Eric Name's article, and it just sounded like Malcolm Brogdon wanted to play point guard. It wasn't going to happen in Milwaukee, and Indiana was going to pay him and give him that role. I think it just came down to he wanted to play point guard. It wasn't going to happen in Milwaukee. And that's that. I think because he even mentioned like the second they traded for Eric Bledsoe, that kind of took it up. Like any chance of him playing point guard was gone, and he was okay with playing the 2 guard because he wants to help the team win, and it was still good for him because he was able to play. But when they re-signed him, that was 100% like, okay, I'm not going to play point guard for this team unless there's an injury to Eric Bledsoe. And that's fine. Like, he wants to play. He thinks he's truly a point guard, and Milwaukee didn't. So be it. So I had no issue with Brogdon. I mean, he's, like I said, he said all these things. I don't think he has any ill will towards the Bucks organization. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, he doesn't want to be in Milwaukee. And I mean, just saying that Milwaukee is a very segregated city doesn't mean he doesn't want to be here. It's just stating an obvious fact.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't know much about Indianapolis, but I'm sure it's not a haven of like racial equality either. So people who are kind of referencing that as well, I think they're kind of missing the mark in that regard.
Well, they just had a cop shooting, so yeah, it's not going to be that much better. Well, I don't know if it was Indianapolis, but I think it was like South Bend. It was in Indiana, so it's not like it's not that much better.
Yeah, so I think people who are referencing that are probably missing the mark as well. I think what you said, Kyle, and just kind of it's not an ill will. Like he was willing to get on Milwaukee at whatever price. Like, he got paid a lot of money to take on a bigger role elsewhere, which in a role that he wants to have. And, good for him and good on the Bucks, given that situation. If they had the idea like, okay, well, this is just too much money to pay a guy who's going to be playing a 2 guard that, he wants to play as a 1, but they're able to get draft picks out of Indiana for the right to like not match the offer sheet to Malcolm. Like, I think all things considered, like the competitive issues for the coming seasons aside, I think the Bucks did as best as they could with a really crappy hand they were dealt with.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think you framed it far more in a much better way than I did, Kyle, in terms of his predilection and preference to play point guard. I think that's that's really interesting. I think he was fine as a point guard when he played as a rookie or whatever, but I mean, there's tons of those opportunities here. Whether Eric Bledsoe was the point guard, I guess, but like nominally that didn't really matter. I mean, Giannis was the primary facilitator. Brogdon had like just as much opportunity to create off the dribble and try and make plays for guys too. So not necessarily, I'm not totally sure if I buy that, at least from that respect. I also don't know why he would want to. I don't think he's really fast enough to guard point guards defensively. So if he wants to do that in Indiana, Godspeed, good luck, man. But anyway, yeah, obviously I hope he does well in Indiana. And I think for years, I mean, the Bucks have made overpays to keep guys. This felt like just categorically like an overpay. I mean, like, good. He should go get his money. He definitely should. And the team, I would say, is certainly worse without him. But I think that whatever way you look at it, I mean, the funny money that was going around, so many people got overpaid this summer, I think, in a lot of respects, and we're just all justifying it because the money's out there and you feel like you need to spend it. And I think paying Malcolm Brogdon that much money, I think all of us kind of were like scoffing at that, saying, yeah, it seems like an overpay. And so probably smart for the Bucks to not make an overpay. I mean, they've done that so many times. Tony Snell, Miles Plumlee, John Henson, all of these guys that, Horst was still there under Hammond. He saw all these overpays. Or Son Ilyasova was a slight overpay. So I was
John
Salmons.
John Salmons.
There it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think there's just a long history of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree in general. And it's, I like we said before, it's like we have this history of overpays, and the concern that makes most sense to me is like I said on the previous podcast, like the owners were very upfront. Like, if we have a competitor, we'll pay whatever it takes to keep the competitor. And then everybody sees the first off season, even if objectively everything makes sense. Like, okay, this is an overpay for a guy who's really good, but maybe not like $21 million and whatever tax implications good. But to have this very obvious and clear situation, like, oh, we'll pay for a competitor, and then the first opportunity they have to pay for a competitor, they duck out on it.
Yeah,
I get why people
shady.
Yeah, I get why people would be upset about that. But like I said, if we're not trying to carry water for the team, I swear that's not what we're doing. But objectively speaking, you can get where they're coming from. Where like, if we can keep as much flexibility and replace Malcolm with like a reasonable facsimile, whether it be like, splicing together Dante and Wes Matthews into a mega person or whatever their plan is. I get the idea behind it in general.
It's also not our money.
Yeah, that's true. Also, you don't need to splice them together. Dante's enough on his own.
That's true. And it's crazy given how healthy Dante is too. Like, when you compare the health of Dante versus the health of Malcolm, like, it's such an easy decision for the Bucks. So I get where they're coming from 100%.
Well, yeah, one guy is definitely healthy.
Yeah, the one guy definitely is not missing an entire foot right now, and they're keeping that under wraps, deep under wraps.
Wait, which guy are we talking about there with the foot?
That's both of them, but I swear Dante's going to come back and he's going to have a bionic right foot. Just to be like, we had to amputate it. We were lying to you guys. He wasn't 100% healthy. And then we all have to pretend like we were really shocked that Dante wasn't actually healthy and he didn't actually prove anything in his 30 minutes of game time last season. But whatever, no big deal. We'll figure it out. How do you feel about, I guess, the only final, as we're kind of wrapping it up here, Adam, since we didn't get all of your free agency takes, how did you feel about I think of all the roster spots, obviously, given Malcolm's not here, the 2 is the biggest, like, question mark. So how do you guys feel about, like, what feels to be setting up to be a platoon between, like, George Hill, Wes Matthews, Dante, Sterling? Like, do we feel good about that? Do we have questions? Pat, too? Like, there's a whole bunch of different options there.
I have a lot of questions. I like I think it's going to be fine in the regular season. I think the frustrating part I think for me is that I think it'll be totally fine in the regular season. There's enough bodies to fill that void. But I can 100% see it getting exposed in the postseason. Just because Malcolm Brogdon was, I would say, probably when he came back, like maybe the third or fourth most important person, clearly way more important than Eric Bledsoe. And you needed Malcolm Brogdon to play the way that he did in the playoffs for the Bucks to even have a shot at beating Toronto, considering how Eric Bledsoe played. So, I mean, if Bledsoe puts up a stinker again next year in the playoffs, and we're like hoping Wes Matthews will save the day, or Godspeed Dante, I mean, good luck, man. Like I just don't like. I still, like I said, tend to be fine with the move, but at this point, I'm doing it a little bit more on the faith of Horst making it some other move to find a guy who will actually be able to compete in the playoffs. But I think it's fine for the regular season, but I think there's lots of reason for concern come postseason.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I think, when Wes Matthews, when the news came across, I think everybody was really excited, and I'm excited too. But they're definitely like similar with George Hill, like how healthy are they actually going to be? And George Hill was awesome in the postseason, but is that going to happen again next year? I think there's some serious questions there. And we just saw with Sterling in summer league, like unless he really reworks himself over the summer, I'm not sure we can go in and say he's going to be like a definite go-to option in the postseason. And then, Dante's got 1.5 feet, so we're going to have to figure out that. But I think there's definite, of all the positions, there are worries there. And I think, again, this kind of runs back to like good on Horst for getting a couple of draft picks, because that plus like the Ursan contracts, those could come in really, come in handy in trying to find somebody else that, just like you said, as we started off the podcast, one thing happens somewhere else and all of a sudden an opportunity opens up and you can capitalize on it. So I think worried, not super worried until like May, but we'll figure it out.
Any other thoughts from you, Kyle, on the two guard position?
Yeah, I think it's Dante's job to lose, which I guess it's fine. I don't know. Like, it's such a weird situation because the two guard out of like Milwaukee starters is going to be the weak spot, but at the same time, that might be a good thing, because if you just need a guy to stand in a corner and space the floor out and shoot threes, that's all right. And I mean, we know Wes Matthews can do it. We know Sterling's capable. We know Pat Connaughton is inconsistent, but he is capable. And same with Dante. Like, I guess what we're asking out of the starting two is going to be a little bit. I think we're going to be asking too much for someone that's going to absolutely be the fifth option out of those starters.
Yeah, especially if Giannis's thing of like, I'm going to try and go in with a guard mentality, then that reduces even more the need to have like a competent on-ball two guard, like just somebody, like you said, Kyle, can just stand around and shoot threes would be ideal. So I suppose that helps reduce my worries a little bit as well.
Also, Bud does like to play big ball. So I could certainly see him basically being like, put Middleton at the two. Giannis is essentially a three or whatever. And then it's like Ursan or Wilson with Lopez in the front court or something. I mean, we saw that huge lineup he ran out last year with who was in that? Was it like Mirotic, Giannis, Middleton, Bledsoe?
Was that the Utah game where like we had 6 players available?
Yeah.
And like we're just going mega sized, and we dominated. It was like a 25-2 run to start the game too, and of course the Bucks lost, but it was an interesting look for sure.
Yeah, so that'll be fascinating. Obviously, the rest of this offseason probably won't be that fascinating. I'm not sure we'll have a whole lot to talk about, so we may take a prolonged break here. But anything else you guys have to say about free agency or summer league before we sign off?
It was a time. It was a time.
Yeah, I think we could probably end on that, but I tend to agree. Summer league, it was as unexciting as we could have expected, and I think, like we have talked about, I think there are things you could quibble with about the Bucks free agency and how the offseason has gone overall, but they didn't have to do a whole lot because the other Eastern contenders kind of either dissolved or are in a lot of flux right now. So overall, I'm pleased. There probably could have been more that the Bucks could have done. Keep a TPE, but Beyond that, I think I think they did as best as they could, and I'm excited for next season whenever it ends up kicking off. And then FIBA World Cup, like we said, then maybe that'll be our next thing to talk about. But
yeah, so obviously, thank you everyone for listening. Go to brewhoop.com for all of our fantastic writing. Follow Brewhoop on Twitter. Kyle's at the helm behind that. Read Riley's piece on the state of the Eastern Conference. You can read my piece about the least essential Milwaukee Bucks Summer League teams of all time. Little shameless self-promotion there. Spoiler alert, this year's was the least essential team that we've ever seen. Shout out all the real Bucks fans who stayed up to watch Bucks versus Team China for the Summer League game. So thank you to those of you who listened, and we'll talk to you again soon.